Hello. Welcome to the Dissident Mama podcast, episode 28. Today, my guest is Rachel Kennerly, wife, homeschool mom, Illinois by birth, but Texan by the grace of God, and host of the podcast Cannabis Heals Me and Just Add Liberty. She's also a certified public accountant. Rachel's a fighter for liberty and a friend, so I'm delighted to have her here. Howdy, Rachel.
Hey, Dissident Mama, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I haven't been kicked off Facebook, so I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah, I know. You weren't part of the great purge of January.
Nope.
This is
Nope.
why
I somehow avoided it.
This is why we're exchanging phone numbers, because I realized when I got kicked off for that 30 days, I was like, wow, that is really such a very vital way that I keep in touch with so many cool people. So remind me to do that when we're off air.
Yes.
We need to exchange digits, but we are friends from the old Tom Woods Facebook elite page. He has since gone to MeWe, and we have actually met in person at an Abbeville secession conference back in 2018, but this is the first time we have seen each other then. So this is going to be delightful.
Absolutely.
You are a busy person. So let's start with your podcast. Cannabis Heals Me. That was your 1st one, correct?
It is.
How long has it been going and how many episodes?
I guess I started the podcast back in October of 2018. 2018? Yep, October of 2018. And this past Monday, I put out episode 127.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. What do you average in a couple a week?
No, it's usually one a week. I've gone up and down because at one point I was doing one a week, and then I would do like a cannabis adjacent issue and put out a second episode a week. And I did that for a while. And then it just, life got really busy and with homeschool and work and whatever. And so now I'm just back down to one episode every other week. And I've been kind of bounced all over the place, up to 2 a week. And now I'm down to like one every other week, just because of other, time constraints, because of other commitments.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I was trying to be consistent. You know how some people put them out the same day every week and all this kind of thing. I mean, I couldn't make that. So, I mean, I think that you've gotten that many is fascinating. And so many people get these things started and they fizzle out after, 30 episodes or something. So, there's some staying power here. So tell me, I've checked out some of the episodes, and there is a whole about page of why you did it, but people may not even click to go and read that. So I want you to tell people why you started this thing about this crazy radical cannabis thing. Tell us about it.
Well, I first got into the first time I was raised in the South, and I grew up in the 80s, the just say no to drugs era, Nancy Reagan and all that, So I had always heard these horrible, awful things about cannabis. There's, people do it and they kill their mother with an axe or something like that. And so when I heard there was a lady who works next door in the salon, and her son had really bad seizures. Like, he would have drop seizures where he would just fall out, basically. And he would have, 100 seizures a day. And so she tried to get, she tried different medications for epilepsy and stuff like that. And none of them worked. And so she went, and this has been probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they were doing a CBD oil study here in Texas. And she went to Texas Children's Hospital and asked if she could get him enrolled in the CBD study. And they told her, no, he doesn't qualify. And if we find out that you've given your son CBD oil, now keep in mind, CBD oil does not have the psychoactive component, that THC, that causes, the head high or whatever. CBD has very trace amounts. CBD oil has very trace amounts of that. So there's not like this kid's getting high from taking CBD oil, but they told her you can't, he doesn't qualify for the study. And if we find out that you've given him CBD oil independently, we will call CPS and have your child taken from you. And so she's like, well, see ya. And she packed up and moved to Colorado, where she didn't know a soul in the world, so that she could get access to medical, just CBD oil for her son. And turns out CBD didn't work. So she ended up having to go to a high potency THC. And this is a
Whoa.
kid that went from having 100 seizures a day. And now she gives him this little tiny, it's called Rick Simpson oil, which is a very concentrated form of cannabis. And she gives him like a grain, like a little rice grain size, rubs it on his gums. And he's been seizure free for, a couple years now. And that was my first idea,
I mean,
inkling
seizure
that
free.
seizure
Complete.
free, like no seizures.
Wow.
So this is my first exposure to this plant being something that could be a benefit to our bodies. And then I ran across this opportunity to get involved in the cannabis industry to provide accounting services. And seeing as how I've been a staunch advocate of the war on drugs for so many years of my life, and knowing nothing about cannabis, I wanted to start the podcast Cannabis Heals Me so that I could learn more about the cannabis plant and to hopefully get the word out to people like myself who think that you should put people in jail for what they decide voluntarily to put in their body. Try to get the word out to them that no, there are medicinal benefits to this plant, and we don't have the right to tell other humans what they can and can't put in their body. But citing facts and figures is not an effective way to communicate with people, because
Yeah.
there are certain topics that people have an emotional response to, and
Mhm.
drugs is one of them, because it's been ingrained in us for decades of our lives that you should not put these illegal substances in your body. And so you have this cognitive dissonance where you have this emotional response that rises up in people when you try to tell them facts about drugs. And so the power of storytelling gives us a way to break down those walls and then be able to come in and tell them facts and figures. But we can use this to disarm that emotional response and let them have a different emotional response of sympathy or empathy. And then we can come in and with the facts and figures talk to them and come from a liberty aspect, because I think as liberty loving people, we try to bring the facts and try to bring, hey, you shouldn't tell people what to put in your body. And that's just so far out of their realm of consciousness. We've got to bring it down to an emotional level, and then we can talk to them about that. So that was kind of the basis of why I wanted to start doing this podcast.
And you say on the website that you're a storyteller, and
Mhm.
you are just simply, you're learning as you go. I mean, you play an important role, but you're just giving people a platform to
Mhm.
humanize it, and I think that is really effective. And um, before I go on to my next official question, can you tell the normies? I mean, what's the difference between CBD and THC?
In the cannabis plant, there's cannabinoids, which are like different components in the plant. And I am not an expert, so even after having done this for a couple of years, I'm not an expert, but there's like probably hundreds of cannabinoids in the plant, and each of these cannabinoids can do things. We have in our body, we have what's called an endocannabinoid system, and then there's receptors in our body that these cannabinoids that are in the plant kind of plug into. And so like the THC, that's one component, that's one cannabinoid in the plant, and that's what causes the head high. It's because it triggers the anandamide in our body, which is the bliss molecule. And then you've got CBD that plugs into the receptors, and it affects other parts of the body. And like I said, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination.
I didn't
So,
mean to
but
like throw this curveball at you, but I think a lot of people are like CBD, THC, what?
right. And really this is kind of new science, because the
Yeah.
endocannabinoid system wasn't discovered until like the 80s. So in all the history of knowing everything we know about the human body, we're still learning so many new things. And because cannabis is on a Schedule 1 drug, there has been a lot of restrictions on what sort of research can be done. But there's a Dr. Meshulam in Israel who's done a lot of research on cannabis. And in fact, I think probably there's US money that funds those studies, but they can't do the same kind of studies here in the United States
Mhm.
because cannabis is Schedule 1 on
Yeah.
the DEA's list.
And I think it's just kind of emblematic of this thing that we used to look at as super evil and it's bad, but then somebody kind of cracks the veneer and says, well, maybe there are parts of it that can be used, but then people are so bought into whatever the old mindset is that they can't look at the good things that can be done from it, whether or not,
Right.
you want it to be legalized for recreational purposes or whatever, I honestly don't have a problem with that. But
Mhm.
definitely medicinal. I mean, opioids and all this kind of stuff help people all the time. So, right, things that come from the poppy
Right. And
plant.
the thing with cannabis is, there's never been a death from drug overdose with cannabis because the receptors, the cannabinoid receptors in the body are not in the brainstem. So
Right.
like the opioids and stuff, they plug into the brainstem, and so that affects your breathing and heart and all that. Well, there aren't any cannabinoid receptors there, so it doesn't affect your body in the same way as some of these other more potent, legal and illegal drugs can. So there's never been a recorded overdose that killed a person from cannabis. Now, there have been like tainted products that have killed people, but just, cannabis itself has never actually
Interesting.
killed a person.
And then when you mentioned Colorado, tell people
Mhm.
why this person moved to Colorado.
Well, when she moved to Colorado, they had a medical program, and I don't think it was they I don't think their recreational program had passed at that point. But one of the things that's been interesting in the interviews that I've done on Cannabis Heals Me is a lot of the people that used cannabis recreationally, when they were diagnosed with a medical illness, come to find out the strains or the cultivars of cannabis that they enjoyed as a quote recreational users were the strains that had the cannabinoid profile that their body needed to heal itself. So they thought they were using cannabis for the fun of it, but really they needed that in their body. Not to say that they didn't have fun using it,
Right.
but it wasn't just about the fun. It's like their body knew that it needed those things, and that their body responded to it, and it was more enjoyable for them to use that particular cultivar.
Wow. Can you have you done a particular episode on that?
I
If
cannot remember off the top of my head because there have been several that have been like that.
Yeah.
And I'd have to go back and listen to
Yeah.
them all to figure it out.
Well,
But,
I'll research it and link to that because that's fascinating. Okay. That's cool. All right. So you come into this now. Did I hear you right? You had originally, I think, said that you were kind of onto the like uh anti-drug bandwagon.
oh, absolutely. I mean, I
Okay.
bought I, I bought the whole, Christian conservative line, everything. And it wasn't until I made this shift to a more liberty-based mindset, and then also heard the story of this young boy who's 2
Okay.
years old,
Yeah.
who is finding health benefits in the cannabis plant, that this kind of expanded my horizons, and thought,
Okay.
okay, maybe they've been lying to me. And then, you kind of like, once pick the scab off that one lie, what else are they lying about? And it's like,
Right.
if they're going to lie to us about a plant for 90 years,
Right.
what else are those SOPs lying
Right.
about?
If Reefer Madness wasn't 100% accurate, gosh darn it, maybe they're
I
telling us
know.
lies. Did you ever watch that in school? Reefer Madness?
No,
Yeah.
no.
I think I'm a little bit older than you, and I think it may have been in a sociology class in high school, but I remember watching it in high school and being like, this was actually serious, and kind of like launched the whole anti-drug thing.
Yeah, it's so cheesy and campy, because I have gone back and watched it now, and I'm like, how in the world could anyone? But I mean, the our expectations of movies are so much higher than they
That's
were in the
true.
30s, when they that was like one of the first talkies.
Right. Unfortunately, our expectation for truth as far as the masses go is at an all-time low, but that we'll get to
Yeah.
that eventually. So this is so cool. You saw stories that needed to be told. You saw this as a human issue, maybe a love
Mhm.
issue, a compassion issue. So what have you learned? Maybe something that didn't pan out as you thought it would. So you're like, I'm going to start this podcast, I'm going to tell the stories, but I know you've learned a lot, but was there one thing where you're like, wow, I really didn't think that's going to be the way it was?
I don't know that there's like one thing that I was expecting to learn that I didn't, but one of the challenges for people who want to use cannabis as medicine is that our body's chemistry and biology is so, from person to person, is so different. It's not like somebody can say, well, this cultivar works for me and I have depression or, lupus or Hashimoto syndrome. So this is going to work for you too. And that's not always the case because our body chemistry is so different from one person to the next. And so the difficult part of using cannabis as medicine is that it's kind of like a hunt and peck. You got to figure out, well, what's the best cultivar for me? What's the best cannabinoid profile that's going to help my body the most? And so that to me was interesting, because you think, well, this works for this person, because when you get a prescription, they've got these prescriptions for high blood pressure and everybody takes the same type of prescription and, a comparable dose. And it just doesn't work that way for cannabis because everybody's just so different. And so that also makes me think, well, if everybody's so different on the plant medicine, then how can they just have this one size fits all pharmaceutical approach to everyone? Surely our body chemistry has to come into play on that as well.
Yeah, the whole unique physiology that we all have. I think of just any over-the-counter medicine that, ibuprofen really gets rid of my headaches, but it doesn't do jack for my husband, so he doesn't take it, and it's the same exact medicine. Yeah, that is a really interesting aspect to it. You also had something called the Grow CFO, where that was kind of your accounting practice where you were focusing on the tax needs specifically of the cannabis industry. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it is a challenging industry to say the least, and that's because of its status as it's gone out of my head now, because of the classification of the drug that it is. Since it's class 1. Was that? Gosh, that's horrible. I have a 2-second memory, and the older I get, the worse it gets.
So they changed the language to confuse people?
No, it's just me. My old age has confused me. It's me. Because of the way that it's classified. There was a court case from back in the 80s where the IRS said, or I guess it wasn't the IRS, Congress said, after this court case, Congress said, okay, you can't deduct any expenses related to your sale of illegal drugs. So you can deduct your cost, because there was this famous case where this drug dealer had not been reporting his income, as drug dealers are wont to do. Well, they arrested like somebody that worked for him, and the guy rolled over on him. And so the IRS comes after this guy and says, hey, you owe us this ton of money because you didn't report this income. They reconstructed his income. It's all cash, but they reconstructed it based on how much goods he had transferred, through this other guy. And so he comes back and he reconstructs his records and he says, okay, this is what I paid for it. I work out of my home. So he took a portion of his home as an expense, as a deduction. And this case takes place in like the height of the Just Say No War era in the 80s. And so it's kind of like egg. And then he presents this to the tax court, and the tax court says, okay, those are legitimate business deductions. So we're going to allow you to take these deductions against the tax that you owe. Wow. And so they reduce how much money he owes. Well, Congress is not happy about this because, like I said, it's at the height of the drug war. And so they come in and they change the law. 280E is the law. And they say you cannot, if you are trafficking in illegal substances, you cannot deduct your expenses. And as a result of that, when you go into a dispensary and you see the employees behind the counter, or you see the facility and that they're renting or buying or, anything like that, none of that is deductible for the cannabis company, the retailer that's selling cannabis. None of those ordinary expenses are deductible because of this tax code. And
even
so
in a state where it's legal, because it's
even in a state, because it's a federal law,
okay,
it's not deductible for federal income tax purposes,
okay,
because it's a Schedule 1 drug. So if you're trafficking a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 drug, none of your ordinary business expenses are deductible. Now, the cost of the product is deductible because that's a cost of goods sold. So with cannabis accounting, what you try to do legally is get as much expense into cost of goods sold so you can reduce your income tax burden. And so it's a difficult thing to do. And so it's kind of a specialized industry for cannabis accountants. And then a lot of the, it's an industry not many CPAs know about. And then it's also an industry that a lot of CPAs don't want to touch because it is dealing with Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs. And so, accountants for the most part are pretty conservative, and they want to, they're this trusted profession, and they don't want, dabbling in illegal drugs, even if you're just doing the accounting for these companies, to kind of taint their image. So a lot of the big four accounting firms won't help these companies. So there's a lot of opportunity available in the cannabis space for accounting. And really, as far as what I've seen in cannabis is, everybody calls it the green rush, but it's kind of similar to the gold rush. And so the people that really make more money are the people that are providing ancillary type services. Like the guys that made all the money in the gold rush were the people that were selling shovels and the pans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The miners themselves didn't make all that much money. And it's kind of similar in the legal cannabis space. It's like the people that are providing services to that industry are making a lot more money than the guys actually selling the stuff.
And would this be a correct assessment? So they're having to roll more of the cost into the price of the product that the person's paying for, so they can offset the other. So to me,
Right.
just lady off the street, buying it illegally where it's maybe cheaper, so it seems like if you really care about the war on drugs, this is silliness, because all it's doing is driving people to a market where it may be cheaper. And
right. And that's the arguments that we as liberty-minded people make is that, hey, if you legalize this, you're going to end the illegal drug trade.
right,
Well, as long as you have these onerous tax laws in place,
exactly.
and as long as the states and the federal government now are eyeing it like a cash cow that they can use to, inject more money into their budget, we're never going to get rid of illegal markets,
Right.
because the legal market is always going to be so much more expensive than the illegal market.
It's almost like they don't really care. Huh.
It's like they have no understanding of basic economics.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Well, it reminds me of the tobacco industry. They spend all these money on these truth.org commercials and, taking them to task, back in the 90s and all this kind of stuff, but they make bank off of that. I mean, a pack of
Mhm.
cigarettes where I live is like $6. When I was growing up, I think it was, $1.15 or something for a pack of Marlboro Lights. And it's like, that's all going to the people that supposedly care about our health. Yeah.
Yeah, the crazy, when I worked, because I worked in a gas station when I was working my way through college, and cigarettes were like $2 a pack.
Yeah.
And I have no idea, $6. I mean, that is way ahead of inflation to be up that much, 3 times as much. Nuts.
All right, let's move on to Just Add Liberty. This is your newer podcast. I think you have just in the 20s. So, girl, why are you starting a second podcast? What's this all about?
Well, because one of the other things that I like to do is garden and be kind of like, my parents are most people would consider them preppers. I mean, I think they just consider themselves prepared, not preppers. So I kind of have this background of, kind of being prepared. And so I wanted to start this podcast because and then also, 2020 was such a terrible year for anybody that loved liberty. And I always thought deep down, everybody really loved liberty until everybody started wearing their face masks because the government told them to do it.
And snitching on people.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm like, there are some people out there that do truly love liberty. And so we need to find some way to give them ideas on how they can get more liberty into their lives. I had no idea that entrepreneurship would free up my life so much, because I had worked, an 8 to 5 job in a local accounting firm, which I love my employers, I love my coworkers, but it never dawned on me that I should work for myself. And a lot of people, when I got my degree and then passed the exam, they're like, "Oh, you're going to go to work for yourself?" I'm like, "No, why would I?" And so now looking back, I'm like, why wouldn't I have? And so, between homeschooling, my husband working for himself, and me working for myself, our schedule is ours. We can decide when we want to do what. I mean, within reason, obviously, but it just, and then we didn't have a lot of debt, which allowed me to quit my job where I made a lot more money and come home and start homeschooling my son and then also work for myself. And so not everybody grew up with the same kind of background that I did. They didn't have parents that kind of instilled those types of values in me. And so I started the podcast because I'm like, let's give people ideas how they can become more free, because 2020 was a year where you just really felt under the thumb of government, and it was literally in and on your face wherever you went, and still is. And so it's like, we've got to figure out some way. We've got to give people hope and a way to say, okay, here's how you can be more free. Maybe you have to wear that mask to go to the grocery store because you have no choice, but here's some other ways that you can be free in your life. Maybe grow some of your own stuff so you don't have to go to the grocery store as often. Find somebody who is raising cattle and buy your beef from him instead of having to go to the grocery store and get it.
Yeah, and you had said feeling like you're under the thumb. It was also a very alone year at first.
Mm-hmm.
The early stages of the spring. March and April, and we're all
Mm-hmm.
running around like chickens with our heads cut off, or maybe just at home not running anywhere because we weren't allowed to go anywhere. And I feel like podcasts like yours and similar ones makes me feel not alone, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel sometimes that we are a minority of a minority of a minority of a
Yes.
minority. We're just this Ron Paul called it the remnant, but it's like this big, people
Mm-hmm.
who aren't insane, that are not gaslit. So I really appreciate it, that you're just talking about things to do. We could all sit around and complain, and complaining is fine sometimes if you're trying
Yep.
to unpack things. There's nothing wrong with that, but ideas that can be put into action are vital as well. So you have diverse guests. Can you think of maybe some of your favorite episodes, or again, something you learned where like, hey, wow, I wish I'd known that 2 years ago?
Trying to pick your favorite episode is like picking your favorite child. So it's just
That's very
unfair. That's an unfair
diplomatic.
question to ask, Rebecca.
Okay.
I mean, really, I've enjoyed a lot of I mean, if I didn't enjoy them, I wouldn't put them out.
Right.
But I guess some of the people like Jim Bovard, he doesn't give a whole lot of he doesn't give a lot of interviews, and he even told me, he's like, I don't give a lot of interviews. So that one was a really fun one for me. And then
I mean, how
speaking
did you
with
snag that? Let's
uh
talk about, can I just name a few of like the diverse guests in your 20
sure,
whatever episodes? So Jim
sure.
Bovard,
Hmm.
Andrew Pudewa, who runs the Institute for Excellence in Writing,
I was
and then
excited about that one too.
Richard Maybury, who writes the Uncle Eric series of like it's homeschool curriculum, I guess, but it's just awesome books that change even adults' lives, mixed in with preppers and gun owners and libertarian chefs and whatnot.
Mhm.
It's really cool. How'd you get those, girl?
I asked. Uh, well, now Richard, he was actually on my Cannabis Heals Me podcast, which
Oh,
he
he
was on there.
was.
Yeah, he was on there for my 100th episode, and I was so stoked about getting him because
Oh, wow.
we had gotten that book series and read it at the house
Yeah.
and started reading it with my son. And then I kind of skipped ahead because he's got a suggested order to read it.
Yeah.
Well, I skipped ahead and started reading the book, Whatever Happened to Justice. And in that,
Okay.
he talks about the drug war. And I'm like, I wonder if I could get him on the show. And so I went out to like the publisher's website and I emailed somebody at the publishing company and they forwarded it to his wife. And then I coordinated with his wife to get him on the show.
That's
And
right.
I
Oh my gosh.
I very
Wow.
much enjoyed that episode. And at the end, he was like, "Oh, this was so much fun." Because I guess he kind of talks to people. We in the conversation, he's like, "Well, you sound like you might be a little familiar with Austrian economics." I said, "A little, just like this much, because economics is not my strong suit. But the little tiny bit that I know is so much more than the
Yeah.
average Joe Schmo on the street. I'll look like a genius or something, which is by far not me." But
I'll
he
link
told
to
me at
that.
the end he really enjoyed our conversation, and it was nice to speak to someone who was kind of on the same page economically. And then Andrew Pudewa, same thing. I googled his there's okay, I'm gonna give you a little hint. There's this website called hunter.io,
Okay.
and you can put that in and put in the web page address
Okay.
and look up all the email addresses that are associated with that domain.
Wow.
And so I went to hunter.io and put IEW.com in, and it popped up with Andrew's email address because that's not on the website. I probably shouldn't be telling people this.
Let me know if I
But
need to edit that after. Was it like writing well kicks butt at gmail.com or something?
no, I won't say it out loud. It was a really simple one though. I probably could have just guessed and got it. But I emailed him and I was really nervous. So I'm like checking all my punctuation and
Yes.
when I sent him an email. But to my surprise, he emailed me back like, just a couple of days later and said he would enjoy coming on and had a great conversation with him. He's,
Yeah.
in
He's
watching the
such a
IEW
good
videos.
speaker.
Oh my gosh, he's amazing. So when watching the IEW videos, he actually referenced Thomas, the Lincoln guy, Tom DiLorenzo's book.
Really?
He actually referenced one of the books. He didn't say the author by name, I don't think, but he mentioned, there's some other books that talk about other opposing viewpoints on Lincoln or something to that effect. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is he a libertarian?
I mean, if you're mentioning Thomas DiLorenzo, who has written now like 4 anti-Lincoln books, that's hardcore.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Now like I said, he didn't say, I don't think he said, maybe he did say Tom DiLorenzo's name by name, or maybe I knew who he was talking about because I was aware of those books. So anyway, so when I started this podcast, I'm like, I've got to have him on because, he's just, and it's such a great curriculum. I love the curriculum because it gives you a step-by-step, because some people aren't naturally gifted at writing. And so it gives you this is the formula for how you write well. So even if you're a terrible writer, you think you're a terrible writer, if you follow the formula, you're going to be a pretty decent writer.
Yeah.
You're going to at least be able to communicate with people in an effective way.
And this is a good segue into my next set of questions, homeschooling. So we're referencing this guy named Andrew Pudewa in the, IEW Institute for Excellence in Writing. This is all part of something. Well, it doesn't have to be part of this thing, but you do classical conversations, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how many kids do you have and how long have you been homeschooling them?
I have one son, and we have been homeschooling. Oh gosh, I think so he's in 5th grade now, and it was like the middle of his 1st grade. So I guess it's been 4 years. And he was in private school before that. And we had a situation where we'd had some foster children in our home for 2 years, and they left, and it was really hard for my son because, that was his brother and his sister, because they'd lived with us for 2 years. And so it was really hard on him because he was in the private school and he was just struggling with a lot of grief. And anyway, I won't go into all of it, but my mother-in-law had actually offered to homeschool him. And I'm like, Cindy, you don't want to do that. He's a very busy 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and that's just too much for me to ask of you. And then after this, I'm like, are you serious about that? And she said yes. And so she actually homeschooled him for us for a couple of years until I left my former employer and came back home to work. And so I've took over homeschooling duties and have been doing it for a couple of years.
Wow. So your first introduction to it, or I guess your first wanting to do it, was that he needed to be with family more so he would feel safer or just maybe more grounded?
Well, it was difficult. It was a loss. And now our son is adopted. And so he's already had the loss of biological siblings. And then on top of that, now he loses 2 more siblings. And, in hindsight, we would have never done that if we known that we were going to create more loss and more trauma in his life. Because that's the hardest things for kids who are in foster care or who have been adopted, is the loss of their biological siblings. A lot of them know their parents were terrible, and they're glad that they don't live with them necessarily because the situation was so bad, but they always, regret losing those connections with biological siblings. So we've always been super proactive in trying to keep him in touch with biological siblings as best we can. And so just to have him lose two more siblings was bad. And it was hard for him. It's and not living it, a lot of people who have not lived it, they're kind of like, well, you knew they were foster kids. You knew they could leave at any time. And honestly, before I had that experience, I said the same thing. But until you've lived it and you've experienced that loss, you just can't, it's hard for you to relate. And, people are like, well, it's not your biological kids. It's not your biological brother or sister. Move on. And it's just not that way. When you love someone, it doesn't matter how long they're in your home. You love
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. So do you feel like the homeschooling experience first with your mother-in-law and then with you? I mean, is it helping him, forget the academics for now. Is he feeling more grounded? Is he excelling? What's the deal?
He's really a brilliant kid. I try not to tell him that too much because it goes right to his head. He's really a smart kid. So I mean, it's been good for him to have the one-on-one. We was in a private school, so it's not like not like he was in a huge classroom with 25 kids.
Right.
But still just the one-on-one and more free time and being able to go outside and play because he's a very energetic kid too. He's mellowed some since he was 6, but he still has a lot of energy. So for him to be able to do schoolwork for 2 or 3 hours and then he can go out in the woods and whack on a tree or whittle a stick down to a sword, he enjoys that.
Yeah, and your son and my 3 sons did one of those out school classes. I forget what the topic even was. I don't know. It was some Supreme Court case or something, and that was pretty cool. So I gotta, I would kind of peek in because I wanted them to do it independently, but I'd peek in and see what everybody was doing. He seemed pretty cool. Yeah, so maybe next secession conference we'll bring the kids.
That'd be awesome. We're studying in classical conversation, that's cycle 3. So we're studying American history this year. And I really wanted with American history to be able to go and do some touring of historical sites, but I mean, who knows what life is going to be like when we're finished in April or May. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. My plan was to just invite myself to all my liberty loving friends on the East Coast and just stay from house to house and go and do some visiting type things. But I don't know what life is going to bring in the next few months. If we have to wear a mask everywhere we go, I'm like, no, not doing it. I don't do that in my real life.
Right.
I'm not going on vacation and doing it.
Well, you're welcome to come anywhere around here, and there's tons of stuff in driving distance. And that's one of the things I did with my kids in 2020 was I, tried to give them as much normality as possible. But we went to battlefields. I mean, we went to the beach and stuff a bunch too. But anytime we went anywhere, we're seeing history. And really, most places like the museums may be closed. Whatever, you can still tour the battlefield, read all the signage, all that kind of stuff. A lot of times what's inside the buildings is a bunch of hooey anyway. So just do your research before you go,
Yeah.
And actually, for instance, we went to Chancellorsville just in September and the signage was pretty good. So my guess is it hasn't been totally, revamped with context and stuff just because it takes money and time. And, the progressives are just so busy doing other things. So sometimes you can get
That's
really
right. They're
lucky.
too busy burning things down. So
They're exhausted.
yeah.
Oh my goodness, they're very busy. So yeah, come on this way. I mean, all sorts of stuff around, but that really is cool. I mean, I've never been to Gettysburg, for goodness sake. I mean, I want to go. I want to go to Antietam before they tear down the Lee statue. I mean, it may already be down, but I feel like, all these bucket list things and, boys and battlefields and stuff. I mean, can't beat that.
Right.
Can't beat it. So
maybe we can meet in the middle, go to Vicksburg.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. All right, we're talking about this when we're done. Everybody's like, well, these 2 chicks are talking about their social life here. What's going on? All right, let's get back to serious stuff. All right. So what's your education philosophy if you have one, and how does your faith play a part in that?
I don't know that I have an educational philosophy. I just don't want him to be stupid.
How do you do it? I mean, what are you doing? Is it kind of, I'm eclectic where I'm
Uh-huh.
a little classical. I'm definitely not unschooling at all.
Yeah, I can't really
I
do
like have
the
a whip and I'm a cattle driver, that kind of thing.
yeah, I
But what
can't
are
do
you
the
doing?
unschool because I don't get unschooling. Maybe people are better at it than me, but if I just left it up to him, he would play video games all day, I think.
Right. Yeah.
But I will say, like, he's gotten we started piano lessons in October. We had
Nice.
noticed he was like kind of plinking around on the piano, and he's very musically inclined. He likes to sing, which is nice because a lot of boys are like they don't want to sing because that's embarrassing. So he enjoys singing, and so he's always been kind of musically inclined. But I'm like, I'm not going to pay for lessons and have to be like harping on him to practice. That is not, it's a waste of my money. It's a waste of the teacher's time. It's a waste of the kid's time. If it's not something that he loves and wants to do, then what's the point?
Yeah.
So he started kind of plinking around on the computer, like not the computer, on the piano. He would just like, just do some keys or whatever. And my mom plays. So when he would go up in the summer, he would kind of play on her computer and she would, or her piano, and she would show him a few things. And so we have a piano here at the house. But he was doing it like over and over. Like it was like used to, he would like swing by and like touch a couple notes, but it was like every day where he was like, you know, playing something. And so I was like, okay, I got to get this boy some lessons because he seems to have a genuine interest. And so he's been taking lessons since October, and I don't have to harass him, about practicing. He'll just go and practice. Now, he doesn't sit down at the piano and practice for hours, but
Right.
he will voluntarily sit down and practice for 15 or 20 minutes, which
Right.
for an 11-year-old, I think is pretty good, especially one who's not even been playing. And then he's like became obsessed with Beethoven's Für Elise,
Yeah.
and he was playing like the first 6 notes over and over and over again. And my mother-in-law was like wanting to stab her ear out with a pencil because he was just stuck. He
Oh,
couldn't figure out, okay, where do I go? So fine. And he talked to his teacher about it, and his teacher's like, okay, see if you can learn it. And so he was like, da 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 da. And then that's it. So my mother-in-law finally, she's like, that's it. She got on YouTube today and looked up the video. And so like he can play, like, now he's not like, whatever, but I mean, like in 30 minutes, he learned it to where he could play it pretty good for a kid who just worked on it today. And he was just so proud of himself. So I guess that's a little of unschooling maybe, but
right.
I don't know. I
Well,
don't have we have the classical conversations, but as far as we don't, I don't know. I'm still new at this. I mean, it's only been 2 years, and really like the first 6 months, I had just come home. It was the middle of the year. I had just come home and was trying to, we sold our house. We moved in with my mother-in-law. And so it's like, I'm still trying to I'm constructing, my husband and I are putting my office together. So the first 6 months of that, after I started, it's like we really didn't do a whole lot. So I'm still really trying to find my way
yeah.
because I don't know that I just know that I can't do unschooling because I don't
Yeah.
think he would learn as much as what I think he should. And then you also feel that pressure where if you're a homeschool mom, you don't want your kid to be stupid, because
Yeah.
people are like, already appalled enough at your decision that you're going to keep your kid home. So I just try to make sure he's smarter than the average
Right.
11-year-old.
Well, it's funny. One of my questions to you is going to be, what have you learned? What are your struggles and what are your successes? And, you know, it's just daily. That's a daily thing, really.
Yeah.
I like to, ask people about their philosophy and stuff like that, but it's honestly, it's kind of a living, breathing thing because it has to deal
Hmm.
with human beings and, the season of life, as people say, and other commitments and all these kinds of things. I mean, it really is dynamic in that it's
Hmm.
always changing. So, philosophy is hard when it's like you're dealing with, like, for me, like 3 unique human beings.
Hmm.
You're a unique human being, your
Yeah.
son is. So, you
I
know.
think my biggest struggle, well, I guess maybe two, probably time management. I'm not very good at time management.
What? You don't do
I
everything exactly on time? I
no,
do.
I'm afraid I don't. And then the other thing that I struggle with is I'm a little impatient and maybe a little or a lot sarcastic. And my son is really he's really a brilliant kid. And so I have pretty high expectations of him. And so when he does something that is just so below the level that I know he's capable of, I really I can't I
I'm
imagine
with
Laura
you.
Blodgett's Homeschool. She's like the little angel sitting on
Oh my
my
gosh.
shoulder
I
because she
know.
seems so patient and wonderful and encouraging. And I'm like the devil. I'm like, I know you can do better than that. That's terrible.
I'm
So
with you.
I don't know. I mean, surely I'm not the only person that struggles with that
No.
because, I try really hard not to have my expectations too high, but then it's like, okay, seriously, we've been doing this is our third year second year, I guess, in essentials. And so, I mean, he knows what a keyword outline is. And he knows once you get the keyword outline, you write a topic sentence, you fill in with what's on the keyword outline, and then you put a clincher. He's 11. I shouldn't have to stand over him.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, what are the 5 parts of the sentence? And he rattles them off. I'm like, okay, then why doesn't your sentence have a capital letter on the very beginning? It's not just about rote memorization, it's about
Oh my gosh.
application as
Yeah.
well.
Yes. Yes. That is so funny. Girl, I've lived it. Oh my goodness. Um, yeah. Well, let me admit something on a homeschooling front. So my oldest son did essentials for 3 years, and then
Mhm,
we left CC, but we were still, doing essentials type things. So for that's just like IEW stuff, y'all. So, but my twins had only done it for 1 year, but they're
mhm.
really good writers. And me being a good writer, it's one of those things where I thought, "Oh, yeah, they're just gonna know." And I just realized, like, in the fall, I my expectations for my twins are way too high, and they were,
Yeah,
like, hating writing. They
yeah.
came to me and they were like, "Writing's stupid, we hate it, it's the worst." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So, that's my homeschool journey is making humongous mistakes like that and going, "Well, we have to
Mhm.
remedy this as soon as possible." So
A and
we're
that's
doing
what
it. We're going back to keyword outlining and
yeah.
stuff.
Well, that's what I'm worried about because it's like if I'm too critical, I'm gonna make him hate it, and I don't want him to hate it because he's really smart, and I don't want him to hate learning because
Right.
I'm a terrible impatient person. So, but it's like I have to have some level of expectation of
Yeah,
him, right? I just need to find I need to be better about, being patient and being nice
yeah.
nicer.
Well, like everything in life, it's a balance. It's a
It is.
balance.
It is.
Speaking of balance, that's this is kind of a reach, but you're in homeschool co-ops and CC and all sorts of stuff like that. Are you starting to see any kind of woke political correctness creep in what was traditionally kind of conservative Christian people, that kind of thing, or is that not a thing?
In our co-op, I don't think it's a thing because we're in East Texas. We're not in some big town. A friend of mine who's the same age, we went to school together and Skylar and I went to homeschool convention last spring and ran into my friend who went to junior high with. They had lived in Virginia for a while and had just moved back. And she was looking at homeschooling her daughter. And so I told her about CC. Now, I have not drank the CC Kool-Aid. I don't think it's the end all be all by any stretch of the imagination, but it is nice because I kind of like the community and it gives Skylar people to play with. It gives me people to talk to. And so she started going to her local CC group. And we're like the old moms because I'm in my 40s and my son is 11. So I'm 10 years older than everybody else in our group. And she's kind of in the same situation. She had her daughter, her third child later in life. So she's like the old mom too. And her experience was not, she didn't like it. And I don't know if it was because of the PC stuff or maybe just the age difference, but she didn't find her community as good. Our community is really good. And I think that's because of the small town. People that live in small towns just have a different mindset than people that live in big cities. She lives down in the Houston area. And, the thinking is, it's just different. The way people think that live in a small town think it's different than what people who live in a big town. And so I haven't really noticed a bunch of PC creep in our
That's
community.
good.
But one of the things that I was disappointed in, because CC will make recommendations for reading materials in addition to the work that you're doing. And so there's 2 or 3 weeks that CC covers not civil rights, but like the war between the states.
Mhm.
And so I was disappointed that all of
Is
the
it still called
recommended
that? Because I knew that
they
people.
do. They do
Good.
say it's I don't know if they call it that, but they in their memory work, it's still
Lincoln's
the war
War
between the
between the
states.
states. People used to get triggered that it was called that because they're like,
Yeah.
Lincoln didn't start that war. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Well,
That's still there.
it's still there, but all the recommended reading material all had a northern slant to it.
Mhm.
None of there was nothing on General Lee or anything like that. From a southern perspective, all of it was from all the recommended reading material was from a northern perspective. So we supplemented with a book that you'd recommended on General Lee. Now, has he finished it? No, but we started reading it. And so that was one of the things I was kind of disappointed about. But as far as our overall, are we have to be PC? Maybe we're supposed to be, and I'm just not, because I'm the oldest one there, and I don't really care what if they like what I say or not.
And it's so dependent on how the director
Mm-hmm.
creates the community. Because really, directors, it's at their discretion who they let in
Mm-hmm.
and don't. So if you got a good director, you probably got a sweet community.
Yeah.
I
think I like our community, so
yeah. I will say, Cycle 3, that's the American history, and
Mhm.
Lori Verstegen writes all the stuff for the essential stuff, the source texts.
Mhm.
She did write them. I don't know if she still does, but beware. It's pretty.
I have noticed some
it's
of the
not
things that
great.
we've Yeah, I have noticed that are you talking about the IEW stuff?
Yeah.
Or
So
yeah.
the source text within the essentials book. Yeah.
Yeah, I have noticed some of the stuff that we've read in the IEW, some of the source materials. I'm like, yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
about that, but whatever.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things where let's go read a book that's actually better. And then that's what you do with your
Uh-huh.
kid. All right. So history, that's important.
Mhm.
What do you do with your kid about Texas history? I mean, are you instilling that in him?
Well, in Texas, typically 4th grade is Texas history. We have not done Texas history. So since we do history with CC, maybe what we'll do, because we'll be out of foundation. This is our last year for foundations. So maybe what we'll do next year is do some Texas history in 6th grade.
Yeah.
But as far as teaching Texas, I haven't done that.
Yeah, my husband's from Texas, and he always tells the boys every year was Texas history. Every year.
Every year. Well, I know they do it in 4th grade, and then I think they do it again in 7th grade. But way back in the 90s, late 80s, they had this comic book style Texas history.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to find one of those, and I may actually have it somewhere. I read that one over and over and over again. I loved it because it was like a comic book. And so I want to see if I can find one of those and let him read it. But looking back now, I think there might have been some probably racy material, maybe a little too racy for an 11-year-old to read, but he'll be 12 next year, so maybe it'll be okay. Because I know there's a reference in there to Santa Anna's mistress.
Yeah.
I remember that. So my dad may have that book because he had it, but seems like I might have taken it from him because I enjoyed reading it so much. I'll have to check with him and see if he still got that, because I may use that for our Texas history text.
There you go, man. Why not? So, I mean, history, we're going to segue into politics. I want to know how you describe yourself politically. And then I want to wrap back around to kind of history, which is secession and
Mhm.
Texas, and tell us who do not live in the Lone Star State what's going on there. So, political labels, people think they're stupid, but I find them useful. So, how would you define yourself?
Well, I guess if they ask who what my political affiliation is, I would probably just tell people I'm a libertarian. Now, I will say that I was not really vocal about being a libertarian during the latest presidential race and all of the signaling that went on to people that are on the left that came out of the LP presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate, unfortunately. I mean, they just, in my opinion, they just pandered. And it's like, you can't pander to those to the left because they're not based in liberty. They have no, they don't value liberty. They don't value what we value, and pandering to them, they're not going to come vote for you. They're never going to vote for you. So why are you wasting your time pandering to people that are never going to vote for you? Now, I'm not saying that they should pander to people on the right. I don't think they should pander at all. I think what they should have done in the messaging, instead of pandering to the left as they were burning down cities across the United States, was say, come out vocally against the lockdowns. I mean, they had the ideal thing that they could have been talking about. And instead, they chose to talk about identity politics instead of things that really mattered to people, which is being locked in their home and told what they have to put on their face in order to walk into a business. And it's not the businesses that decided this. I don't know any private businesses that were requiring people to wear masks before these statewide mask mandates came down. And as far as Texas goes, I don't think it has a prayer in the world of passing, or, because people in Texas, they're all hat and no cowboy.
Hmm.
And nothing, I mean, looking around at my fellow Texans, I was really very disgusted because we say we're the Lone Star State. We're an independent country. But when, Governor Abbott, who's a tyrant wannabe, told people that they have to wear a mask, everybody lined up to put their mask on.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anybody very few people talking out against this is an encroachment on our personal beings. And the phrase come and take it, which used to be a threat, was now an invitation to the government to come and take our liberties. So as far as Texas passing, I don't think it's got a snowball's chance in hell of passing here in Texas. Texas will remain under the thumb of the United States government because that's where the majority of the people that live in this state want to be.
Well, that is highly disappointing to us that do not live in Texas because, we're on the outside and seeing
Mhm.
these little bursts of excitement and, we're wanting to live vicariously through people who are actually, you know, walking the
I
walk
would
and
love
not
to get
just
excited
talking the
about it.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to get excited about it, but looking around and seeing how my fellow Texans reacted to the government overreach in
Yeah.
2020, I have zero hope that any of these people would actually rise up and say, we don't want the federal government telling us what to do.
And when you're doing your Cannabis Heals Me podcast, it so much has to do with the 10th Amendment. Where the states are sovereign,
Mhm.
the federal government, the general government is a creation of them. These states acceded to this thing called the US Constitution. Uh how does that play in the cannabis thing? I mean, is it the entire thing? I've heard Michael Bolden talk about how we can all learn from how, pot became legal because they concentrated on one thing and they
Mhm.
just hammered it over and over, and they did it at the state level and they just said, come and enforce it, Washington. What are you thinking
And I
about that?
wonder if, because drug legalization is usually associated with the left. Not that everybody that is for legalization is on the left. I mean, that to me, that is one of the nicest aspects about being in the cannabis space is that it's not a political issue. People from the left and the right, Democrats, Republicans, libertarians can all come
Come together.
together
Yeah.
around this issue. It's not a divisive issue for the most part. Yes, there are people on the right that think it's horrible, but there can be people across the political spectrum come together and work on this one thing. But I don't know if there's another issue that's going to unite people like cannabis. And I, because the left isn't going to join in with guns. And really, the left doesn't come at cannabis from a liberty perspective. They usually come at it from a perspective of this impacts minority communities and we need to get rid of it because, and it does. I mean, let's be honest, when we look at the statistics, it does more negatively impact people in the Black and Hispanic communities than it does people in the white people. But they kind of come at it a lot of times from that perspective, as opposed to, this is wrong. We have personal liberty, and we should be able to decide what we put in our body. That's not the way they approach it. So
Yeah.
when the people that work on the cannabis issue don't automatically go over and say, well, we're for medical freedom as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not a principle based thing. It's an issue based thing, because it's economically disadvantageous to these other issues. Not that that's really the only reason, but
That's interesting, because if they're not sharing some kind of principled stance, because there are leftists who are buying guns, there's Redneck Revolt and all sorts of, whack job people who, are going out using their guns against, evil right wingers. They want to have the guns and have me not use my guns. So it is definitely not a principled stance. So, well, what about secession? We had attended that conference and we had Marcus Evans, was that his name?
Yeah, Marcus Ruiz Evans or something like that.
And he's the head of Cal Exit, or he was. And one of the things was, his intro was, "Hey, I'm from California and we're liberal, but we don't want you telling us what to do, just like we don't want to tell South Carolina what to do, or Texas." And it was so refreshing. You don't, do you think secession can do that? That people want to, I just don't think enough people want to be left alone. I think people like telling other people what to do.
Well, they want to be left alone, but then they want to turn around and tell other people what they have to do. And I think if we've seen anything in 2020, people like telling other people what to do and calling the police on them when they don't do what they think they ought to do.
And it's encouraged. The whole January 6th thing, the storming of the Capitol. There are billboards, big billboards in North Carolina and South Carolina. I was in Columbia this weekend and saw one too. I thought it was just like a thing in North Carolina where I live. Oh, report people, the coup, yada yada. I don't remember what the verbiage was because it was stupid and I looked away. Yeah. Actually, I took a picture and I laughed at it with my sons. Then I looked away, but we all laughed. But it's actually not a laughing matter. It's pretty freaking scary.
Yeah.
So this leads to my last round of questions. Preparation. What are we to do? I mean, Great Reset. I wanted to say, like, Rachel, how are you preparing for the coming crazy? But it's here. I mean, we've been living it for the past year. And I love your Just Add Liberty podcast tagline: everyday freedom, and how to find it in an unfree world. So give us some clues. What do you know? What are you doing? What are you doing personally? And what have you learned that people can do instead of just sitting around like we're spinning our wheels all the time?
Well, on January the 6th, when that brouhaha went down in Washington, D.C., I was planting my garden and I was looking up, okay, how long does it take from, what's the, how long does it take from the time I plant to when I'm going to harvest? So I'm Googling that because it's not on the package of the seeds that I bought. And so I see breaking news, Capitol's been stormed. I'm like, you know what? I don't have time for that. I can't do anything about it. Nothing I do here in East Texas, no amount of hand wringing that I do here from my chair in East Texas can help me, but planting my garden can help me. So what I have decided to focus on for 2021 is I can't control Washington. I can't control Austin, Texas. I can't control City Hall right down the street from me. What I can control is right here on my property. And so what I've kind of done is I've gone through and I've done like what are my weaknesses? What do I need to address? What are ways that that I can improve my personal liberty. And so we've expanded our garden and we're going to plant more this year. I have a freezer full of meat. If, push came to shove, we wouldn't have to go to the store to buy meat because I found a friend who sold me meat. My dad's got a cow he's slaughtering in a couple weeks. So I'll have more meat to add to the freezer. So what my focus this year is what can I control? And just focusing on that, making sure we've got food, making sure we've got groceries, just trying to get as much debt paid down. I mean, we don't have a lot of debt, but just getting stuff paid down, trying not to spend out on outrageous things and not worrying about the things that are outside my control. I'm not wasting any time on Washington. And all of my focus this year is going to be on our property and on local politics. What can I do? Who can I influence on a local level to have, lower taxes in my life? One of the things that I worked on last fall was getting a unit road system passed, which should help us, the roads should help us have cheaper roads, which lead to cheaper property taxes. So that's my focus on 2021. What are key weaknesses in your life? Do you have food? Do you have a plan? Do you have, access to certain things? What's your neighborhood like? What kind of, do you have money in savings? Do you have some cash on hand in case you can't get to the bank? What are the things that you can control? What would happen if the world stopped tomorrow or the economic system fell in? How long could you go without, having to work or having to go to the grocery store? And so that's our focus, or my focus, or our family's focus for this year is focusing on the things that we can control and trying to identify the areas in our life where we need to kind of fortify.
Yeah, and we just started our homeschool co-op yesterday. And these are smart people who were, before 21, I would just say, average conservatives.
Hmm.
Brilliant, wonderful people, my sisters, but not radical to the
Yeah.
degree that I am. Well, so
Yeah.
that's a pretty higher bar of radical. But I'm
Yeah.
telling you, 2020 is lighting a fire under people. And exactly what you just said is what all the conversations were yesterday. That
Well, that's encouraging.
screw Washington, D.C. I don't care
Hmm.
what they pass. They ain't getting my guns. They ain't getting my kids, and I ain't taking a vaccine. Boom. Come
Yep.
in, come and enforce it. So
Yeah.
if we want to, consolidate somehow and, make sure, you got a good sheriff, which is super important.
Hmm.
My county does
Yes.
not have one.
Right.
Um, all this very build community. You had said this earlier about pulling the scab off. 2020 pulled the scab off, and
Hmm.
I think people know who are the people who have their backs now and who are not. They're the people not calling the FBI on you. Hint, hint. Those are
Yeah.
not your people. And we just
And
go
community,
from
you're
there.
right. You're absolutely right. Community is a huge part of it. Who does have your back? Who
Mhm.
who's gonna, because we have a salon that operates here on the property. And in Texas, we had a shutdown, just like other states. They shut down non-essential. It's like, how can you call somebody non-essential who's bringing home money in a home? You know, so they shut down the salons for, I don't know, a month, 2 months, month and a half, something like that. And I
It
told
was
the
3
ladies at the
here.
salon,
It was 3
yeah,
months
well, it
here.
wasn't quite as long here in Texas because of Shelley Luther. So we were fortunate that somebody had the testicular fortitude to stand up to Governor Abbott's tyranny. Otherwise, who knows how long hairdressers would have had to go without having any income. So I told the ladies here at the salon, I said, the salon sits off the road. I said, you guys pull around to the back of the salon and you can do whatever you want and nobody here is going to say a word. And I told my son, I said, what happens on this property does not leave this property.
Mhm.
And so I said, look, I said, now I don't think a lot of them some of them took advantage of it. And some just kind of went from, to people's houses and did haircuts or whatever there. But, if it'd gone much longer, I think they would have been more willing. But then they were afraid that they were going to lose their license, which goes back to licensure and how the government uses licensure to hold people and try and drag them down. But I think if it had gone much longer, they probably would have been like, "Yeah, okay, we'll probably sneak into the back." But I told them, I said, "Y'all park in the back. We're not going to say anything. They'll never know that y'all are here."
Yeah.
So fortunately, it didn't have to come to that. But I think community is very important. Finding people that are going to have your back. We read a book on North Korea called Nothing to Envy. We finished it up in maybe 2019, early 2020. And even, my son who's 11 was watching things kind of unfold in 2020. Because in North Korea, I don't know if you're familiar with their society, they have what's called an imam, which is like this basically like an informant that lives in the community and everybody knows who it is. And this person informs to the government on all the people that live in the neighborhood. And people will come and tell that person stuff that goes down. And so just watching some of the stuff that went down, my son's like, "Wow, this sounds a lot like North Korea." And I'm like, "I know, right?"
Wow.
And people just lapped it up. So, I mean, surrounding yourself with trustworthy people that you can swap off, you need to find people to put into your circle that are, medical professionals, electricians, plumbers, people that you can call on. Because, I mean, I hate to sound like a pessimist, but I feel like social credit scores are just around the corner.
So do
I
I.
really think that it's just around the corner. And I think you need to have people in your circle that you can work with to get things, because we can't do everything for ourselves. I can't grow everything I need here on this
Right.
property. So we've got to have community in order to be able to survive.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, again, I hate to sound like a pessimist or a conspiracy theorist, but I think it's just a matter of time until we're going to have to be real selective about who we do business with.
Yeah. And I think one of the things is creating, some kind of parallel institutions and alternative systems where we should, and I know it's hard because sometimes you want to spend your money at a place where you get the biggest bang for your buck so you can have
Mhm.
disposable income to do other things
Mhm.
with it, support people or, build something cool of your own. But
Yeah.
we really need something where we can support each other all the time. You go and you help a liberty-minded person or a super based person who doesn't bend on the mask thing or whatever. And sometimes you can figure that out by reading a mainstream news story that oh, here are the worst people around. You go, oh, well, these are all awesome people. I want to go
Yeah.
to their
Yeah. I'm
business
totally
because
going to do business with them.
right.
Well,
My
I'll tell you this. We've been needing some sheets because we got a Craftmatic adjustable bed because we're old. It's not a Craftmatic, but it's like one of those. So we needed new sheets because it's a split king because we have our own controls. And so I had bought some sheets, and then I was like, I need another. I gotta have more than one set of sheets for this thing. As much as I hate to spend money on those adult type things, but when I heard that Twitter had banned the My Pillow guy, I'm like, okay, I
yes.
guess I'll buy some My Pillow sheets.
And there
I
you
mean, I don't
go.
necessarily agree with everything he believes,
No.
but to have, the Twitter ban him, and then, they took him out of the stores at Kohl's and Bed Bath & Beyond and somewhere
Yeah.
else. I'm like, well, I guess I'll buy some of his sheets and help that guy out. Plus, I think his girlfriend lives here in town.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, that is just a great little example. But the hard thing is, when leftist progressives, whatever, they run, that they own all the technology. So
Mm-hmm.
we got to get like those 4chan people to stop, doing whatever it is they're doing that's not productive. They actually do
Right.
quite a few productive things actually. But, start building some kind of stuff and we'll all come and
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to virtue signal. You don't have to agree with somebody 100%. My pillow guy, boom, I'll give you your business. If you're not a freak show virtue signaler woke person, I'll give you my money any day of the week. And I think that really is the key. But we got to do it. But I guess start small too. So it is kind of small and big all at the same time. Because here I feel like you're one of my people and you're all the way in freaking Texas. So
I know. Y'all
geez.
just need to move here. I mean, as awful as I think Texas is, I think it's still far better than North Carolina.
I know,
And we
North
don't have any
Carolina.
state income tax. North Carolina.
This is true. This is true. Well, listen, you are just a normal person who is passionate about truth and justice and freedom. And I have, I like normal people who just want to love on their families and be kind to their neighbors. And you are that person. And you're not resting on your laurels either, too. So you're not just a person who's complaining, but you're doing. And I find that so refreshing. And I thank you so much for coming on the show. Is there anything you want to plug before we leave? And I'll make sure to have lots of good show notes.
I guess if folks want to check out the podcast, they can go out to cannabishealsme.com or the justaddliberty.com. It's, that's kind of where I put stuff. And then, Instagram, I'll post pictures of my chickens and kind of what we're doing around here. I started seeds this year, for like eggplants and tomatoes and stuff like that. I usually buy my seedlings, already started, but I'm like, well, one, I have like way too many seeds. I'm a seed hoarder. And I'm like, I got to actually start these. And I usually procrastinate on that and don't get it done. So I've started that. So if folks want to follow me over on Instagram for Just Add Liberty, I post stuff about what I'm doing there.
Yeah, and I started my first garden last year, and I didn't realize like how important seeds were until there were none to be found. So
yeah. So if anybody is wanting to garden, Baker Creek, who I buy a lot of my seeds from at rareseeds.com, their website they've taken their website down 3 times already this year, because they're just overwhelmed with order. Another little trick that I just learned, you can actually buy seeds off Etsy. So if you go out to Etsy, if you go out to Etsy and search for seeds out there, you can buy seeds off of Etsy.
Interesting.
So I when Baker Creek's thing was down, I did a search for a particular seed I was looking for, and it popped up on Etsy. And so I bought some seeds off Etsy, and they're supposed to be coming in here pretty soon. So.
And when she talks about her garden, y'all, it's beautiful. I mean, trellises and all this stuff. You just wrote that blog post about that loofah thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was that your first blog? Your first essay?
Yeah, I need to do more blogging.
Yeah, I liked it. It was really good.
Again, it's just about finding the time. But I haven't posted on Facebook because I've been trying not to be on social media as much because it's just such a time suck.
Yes.
And then you get on there and you gripe about everything that's wrong with the world while you should be working on trying to make things better in your own world. But I moved my garden because I was running out of space. My husband loves tomatoes, and I'm like, I can only fit so many tomatoes in 4 42 by 84 inch beds. So I was thinking about expanding.
42 by 82.
42 by 84 inch. So it's like 4 foot by 8 foot beds.
That's still
big. Well, you just don't know how much my husband loves tomatoes.
Okay.
So I needed more space. And so we actually built a bigger garden. We built 4 new beds they're like that kind of, I don't know how to explain that, like a right angle. It's like 12 foot this way and 12 foot this way. And then they're 4 feet deep. So on the inside, they're 8 feet deep. So I've got 4 of those now. And so now I'm like sitting here trying to figure out, what am I going to put in all this space? Because I'd originally told Charlie, I said, well, let's just do 8 feet. And he's like, no, he says, you're going to want more. So he went to the 12 foot. I'll send you a picture of it. So I've like way expanded the garden, and he got out there and he built those beds for me. My husband's awesome, and he just got it all done. So it'll be a different garden this year because it's a different space and bigger, much bigger.
And I was going to say an idea as far as doing more blog posts about things you love. Get Skylar to do it. There you go. Incorporate it.
And then he can, a good idea.
Because sometimes I'll get my kids to write a blog post that I'll put on Dissident Mama, or they'll do it.
Awesome.
And I'll think, that's really freaking good. I'm putting that on there. I might put a little intro or something, but yeah, they get excited sometimes when they're like, oh, people are actually going to read this.
Oh, okay. That's a really good idea, Rebecca, because he likes to go outside, and he's gotten into survival type stuff. So we bought him a survival book for Christmas. So he's kind of
Nice.
been out there whittling and all those sorts of
Whittling.
things. So I could get him to see if he wants to write a little article on whatever he's doing out in the woods. He'll put
Yeah.
his backpack on and go out in the woods,
Yeah.
which I love because we did that when we were kids. You know,
Yeah.
there were 4 of us and I was 10 and the oldest, and we would all pack up and go out in the woods and spend all day in the woods
Yeah.
and then come back in. So I love that he puts his little backpack on that has water in it and goes back to do whatever it is in the
Yeah.
woods.
He can
So
journal about his whittling out in the woods or whatever.
that's right. That's right.
All right, dear. Well, it has been a pleasure. I could keep talking to you, so we'll just have to hang out again sometime. And
That's awesome.
thank you so much. And I'll be sure to link to all your good stuff and keep up the good fight.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, bye.
Bye.